All right, so we're going to start in on our vertebrate unit. We're going to study about 3 different types of vertebrates here. We're going to study fishes, which is what we're going to start with today. We're also going to study reptiles, and we're going to study birds. So we're going to have dissections that go along with each of those. We're going to be dissecting perch at the end of this week, then sharks, turtles, and pigeons. So we're going to take a really good look at the differences in vertebrates as compared to what we have been seeing in the invertebrates that we have been studying. So we're going to look at the features, again, of vertebrates that make them different from invertebrates. You should know at this point that the difference has to do with the backbone. Invertebrates lack a backbone, and vertebrates have a backbone. We're also going to look at the characteristics that most fishes have in common, and we're going to look at the characteristics that make them very well adapted to aquatic life. So at this point, you should have in front of you right now your study guide for this lecture. We're going to be in Chapter 28, Section 1, looking at the characteristics of fishes. Now, you might notice that your study guide is a little bit vague. It asks for 3 characteristics that fishes have that make them adapted to aquatic life, and it asks you to describe them in detail. There are multiple answers, correct answers, for your study guide. The biggest portion of this study guide that I need you to focus on is making sure that you adequately describe the characteristic, because you may very well have on your next upcoming test, and I don't have a date for that yet, you may very well have an essay question that asks you about 3 characteristics that make fishes well adapted to aquatic life. So make sure you describe the characteristics in which you pick in detail. Okay, so characteristics of vertebrates. Again, the biggest difference between invertebrates and vertebrates is that invertebrates lack a backbone, and vertebrates have a backbone. So animals that have a vertebral column are going to belong to the subphylum Vertebrata, and they're also going to have these specialized cells associated with the vertebral column that develop from what we call a nerve cord, and this happens during embryonic development. There are several classes of vertebrates. Those include fishes, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. We will cover 3 of these. We're going to cover fishes, reptiles, and birds for this unit. All right, now that vertebral column is the most important characteristic of vertebrates. The vertebral column is going to be made of cartilage or bone. Cartilage is flexible, tough material that is found in skeletons, or, for example, we have bone in our skeleton. A good example of a vertebrate that has cartilage that makes up its skeleton is that of a shark. Now, the vertebral column has several different functions. We think of it as a very strong support structure in our back, which is true. It is very strong, and it serves as a function of support, but it also serves as an attachment point to very important muscle groups. The muscles that attach to our spinal column, our vertebral column, our backbone, can help us run, can help us twist side to side. Those muscles can also help fish swim and maneuver in strong currents. So that vertebral column is very strong, but it's also flexible. You and I can bend forward, backwards, to the side, within limits, but it is flexible to allow us to move in the way that we need to. Now, one of the things that we're going to see here is we're going to see this term called a notochord. And we're going to also see this term referred to as a dorsal nerve cord. Basically, what we're talking about here when we talk about the notochord and the dorsal nerve cord is we are talking about what will form into complex nervous systems as an embryo develops in utero. So here's a little bit more detail about what we're talking about with that neural cord. Now, when we talk about vertebrates, this term neural crest comes up. And a neural crest is a group of cells during embryonic development which will develop from the nerve cord in vertebrates here. So our neural crest is going to develop from and just on top of the nerve cord in vertebrates. And this is very similar to what you look like when you were going through embryonic development in the first trimester of your mother's pregnancy. Now this is really important. The nerve cord and the neural crest are going to develop into some very important neurological structures. We're going to have portions of the brain and skull come from the neural crest and the nerve cord. We're going to have certain sense organs along with nerve fibers that come from these structures as well. All of these develop from the neural crest. Now, for fishes, obviously fishes live in aquatic habitats. They don't really have legs to walk around. So they're going to be found in both freshwater aquatic habitats, such as lakes, ponds, streams, and marshes, as well as marine water habitats, such as seas and oceans. Now, fishes have vertebral columns. Most of them have jaws. Most of them have paired fins. Most have scales, gills, and single loop blood circulation. Now notice that they have a loop blood circulation. This implies that blood is contained within blood vessels. So our fishes are going to have a closed circulatory system as opposed to many of the invertebrates that we've been studying that have an open circulatory system. Now, one of the characteristics of fishes is that they have jaws. Many of our invertebrates did not have what we would really consider to be jaws. Our starfish ejected its stomach out of its body to digest prey. Arthropods have a type of jaw, the mandible that we observed. Clams didn't really have a jaw. So jaws are going to be one of the characteristics of fishes, and this is going to allow fish to prey on a larger range of animals. These fishes are going to move a lot. They're going to be predators. They're going to be constantly swimming. So having a larger variety of prey is going to be very advantageous for them. Now, one of the biggest things that you're going to have to identify in your perch dissection is the variety of fins that exist on a fish, and they all serve very specific purposes here. So notice we have a caudal fin, we have dorsal fins, we have pectoral fins, we have pelvic fins, and we have an anal fin here. Now, some of our fins exist as singular fins, but some of our fins are paired fins. And we'll talk about what that means here in just a second. Now, when we talk about a fin, we're talking about a paddle-shaped structure. This is going to be found on a fish or other aquatic animal. Now, those fins are very important because some of them are going to be used for balance, some for steering, some for propulsion, or some mixture of those three things. So, take for example, the caudal fin on the back is a very large, obvious fin on the back of the fish. That fin is used for steering and propulsion. It drives the fish forward. The dorsal fins located on the top of the fish are going to be primarily used for balance to help keep the fish upright. The anal fin is also going to be used for balance. Now, our paired fins are also used for balance, but they're used for balance in a way that helps them reduce their chance of rolling over to the side, and they allow for better steering during swimming. So you'll notice that when a fish is steering, it will use its pectoral fins quite a bit. And when it's kind of just resting in the water, it'll still use its pectoral fins so that it doesn't roll over to the side. So pectoral fins are a great example of a paired fin that is used to reduce the chance of rolling over to the side. We've also got pelvic fins that are paired fins that reduce the chance of rolling over to the side. Now, many of our fishes, most fishes I would say, are going to have scales. Scales are small, flat, plate-like structures near the surface of the skin, and they can either be made of bone and skin, they can be made of tooth-like material, or they can be made of enamel and bone. Now, these scales serve as a source of protection for the organism. Just like your skin protects you. Your skin protects you from UV rays, from wind, so that you don't lose quite as much body heat. They protect you for a variety of environmental things. Although the environmental effects that a fish is going to face is going to be different, their scales still serve as that exterior source of protection at the surface of the skin. Now, with our fish are going to be moving a lot more than most of our invertebrates. They are going to be predatory animals. They are going to move a lot. So with that increased movement, we need a better way of getting oxygen into the organism's body. So fish are going to have gills. Now, what's really great about the gills of a fish is that they have what is called cross-current flow in their gills. So let me tell you exactly what that is. Now, fish get oxygen from the water when it enters their mouth and flows across their gills. Where the oxygen from the water diffuses into the blood is where we're going to have this cross-current flow. Basically, the flow of the blood in the gills is flowing in the opposite direction of the water moving across the gills. So the flow of the blood goes one direction over the gills, the water goes another direction, and what this does is it increases the rate of diffusion and allows for a more efficient uptake of oxygen. Now, some fish, such as the perch that we will be dissecting, are going to protect their gills with what is called an operculum, and that is a term that you will need to know and you will need to identify on your perch. The operculum is a movable flap that is basically on top of the gills. It aids and serves as a means of protection. It protects those gills from things in the environment that might harm it in some way or fashion. Now, with an increased need for oxygen, we're also going to need a better method of circulation to efficiently move that oxygen where it needs to go. So unlike many of our invertebrates, vertebrates are going to have a closed circulatory system. They are going to have a heart and they are going to have blood vessels. Now you and I, our closed circulatory system has a 4-chambered heart. We have 2 atriums and 1 ventricle. In most fishes, the heart consists of 2 main chambers, 1 atrium and 1 ventricle. Just like the human heart, the atrium is where the heart receives blood from the body, and the ventricle is where the heart pumps blood to the gills. So they will have a capillary network just like you and I do. They'll have one at the source at the side of the gills, just like we have a capillary bed at the side of our lungs. And they'll have a capillary bed at the site of the tissues in which that oxygen is moving to. Now, for feeding and digestion, most of our fish are not going to have teeth. We will see those in sharks. So most of our fish are actually going to swallow their food whole. When they swallow their food, it passes through the esophagus, just like you and I have, to their stomach, and that's where the digestion begins. Now, you and I can't synthesize certain amino acids. We have to eat food. We have to eat protein, types of proteins in order to get those amino acids. And fish have the same problem. So fish are unable to synthesize certain amino acids, so they're going to need to get them from their food. Now, just like you and I, they are going to need to filter their waste, basically whatever cannot be absorbed by the stomach and the waste products produced by all the tissue cells. So the cellular wastes are going to be filtered from the fish's blood by the kidneys, exactly the way that our body works. What they have in addition to those kidneys is this unit called a nephron. And a nephron is a filtering unit within that kidney that helps maintain the salt and water balance of the body and to remove cellular waste products from the blood. So, if you've ever had a pet fish, maybe a betta, you might know that if that betta is acting a little funny, if it's acting a little sick, if it's acting stressed out, one thing that pet folks will recommend is that you add a little bit of aquarium salt to their aquarium. Not much, just a little bit. And they market it as an electrolyte balance. Just like you and I need an electrolyte balance when we have a really hard workout, we need to replace some of those salts that we're sweating out. Fish also need to help maintain a salt and water balance. They need to have an electrolyte balance. So pet stores will sell this aquarium salt that you put into the aquarium of a freshwater fish, such as a betta fish. So even within our freshwater fish, they have to have this nephron that helps them maintain the electrolyte or the salt and water balance of their body. Now, for our vertebrates, we're going to see a lot more complicated nervous system, and this includes the brain and the senses. We're going to see color vision in fishes. We're also going to see some chemical detection, which is really neat. We're going to talk about how they use some of that. They're going to have hearing senses, and they're going to have a sense of balance that is coordinated in the brain. Now, one of the things that you will need to point out in your fish dissection is the lateral line system. This is a very important part of your material. This lateral line system, if you look at the picture of this fish on the screen, it's a lateral line. It's a line that goes from the head to the tail, and on this fish it is lighter in color, as it will be in most of your fishes. And this lateral line system is really important because it's a sensory system. So you and I use our fingers to kind of feel everything around us. The lateral line system does something similar for a fish. It allows the fish to detect movement in the water, and it also helps keep them upright and balanced. So a catfish that lives in the bottom of a really muddy stream still knows which direction is up, partially due to its lateral line system. We're also going to start to see more complicated brain in our vertebrates here. Notice that our fish have an olfactory bulb, which is used for chemical detection. We have our optic lobe, which is used for vision. We have a cerebellum, and we have a medulla oblongata. For reproduction, most of our fishes are going to reproduce through external fertilization. But some of our fishes do have internal fertilization. For example, the shark, the species of shark in which we will be dissecting, will use internal fertilization. The female sharks will actually give live birth to little baby sharks that are ready to come out eating and swimming. But our perch are going to have external fertilization, as will most other fishes. Now, for our fishes, they're going to have a very specific type of external fertilization. What's going to happen is male and female fishes are actually going to release their gametes near each other in the water in a process called spawning. This often involves either a display of some sort on the male's part. For fishes like salmon, they actually change color to indicate that they are ready to spawn. Now, when the gametes meet in the water during spawning, those developing embryos will get nutrition from the yolks of their eggs, so they don't really need any parental care. In fact, many fish produce a really large number of eggs and exhibit very little care for their offspring once they have released their gametes. For movement, we want to make movement the most efficient as possible, so most fish are going to have a very streamlined body shape for moving efficiently through the water. Some of our fish are going to have mucus that lubricate their body, making it even easier for their body to move through the water. We also have several different types of fish that have a gas-filled space that is called a swim bladder. This is going to be really important because the swim bladder allows a fish to control its depths so that it doesn't have to work quite so hard to stay at either the top of the water column or the bottom of the water column or somewhere in between. Now, you and I have opposing muscles to help us move our bodies. Fish are also going to have opposing muscles, and they're going to move through the water by contracting muscle groups on either side of their body. All right, so that is the end of today's lecture. Make sure that you get your study guide completed. Again, make sure you adequately fill out the description for the 3 adaptations that you chose, because that information is very likely to come up on the next test that you take. Please get those turned into your hour folder by the time that you leave class today. Thank you, and I will see you later.